Let me read to you a passage from the 12th chapter of St. Matthew's Gospel, verses 14 to 21. It's the Gospel for Saturday of the 15th week of Ordinary Time. St. Matthew writes, "The Pharisees went out and took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. When Jesus realized this, he withdrew from that place. Many people followed him, and he cured them all, but he warned them not to make him known. This was to fulfill what had been spoken through Isaiah the prophet. Behold, my servant whom I have chosen, my beloved in whom I delight. I shall place my spirit upon him, and he will proclaim justice to the Gentiles. He will not contend or cry out, nor will anyone hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, a smouldering wick he will not quench, until he brings justice to victory. And in his name the Gentiles will hope." That's from Matthew chapter 12, verse 14 to 21. We are led to think of Christ's mercy. What do I mean? Well, as we think of the course of history, one great theme is the presence of power. Power ebbs and flows. It rises and falls. It has its impact, and it wanes. There are persons in history who gather power and exercise it in various ways, and it is often taken away from them. The common man, caught up in the stream of history, looks to power to gain the help he needs. He may look to those who are powerful in human society, or he may look to the supernatural powers above. If we consider those persons who have had power over others in society and in history, how often is their power exercised violently and for self-seeking purposes? Consider the powerful ones in the past: Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Genghis Khan, Napoleon Bonaparte, and many others. They left a trail of carnage and human massacre in the pursuit and exercise of great power. Consider even the individual on the smaller stage of his own personal life, of family and work. How often it is that when he has or gains power over others, he causes injury to them. But now, let us consider one person in history who showed astonishing power over those things which all would take to be subject to the power of God alone. I refer to Jesus Christ, who healed the sick, cleansed lepers, raised the dead, quelled storms, walked on the sea, fed thousands of people with a handful of food, showed a power of mind no one could match in debate and in exposition, and who showed himself to be beyond the control of others unless he allowed it. Take any other figure in history, no matter what his military or political power over others, and ask, could he have done these things which Christ did? Obviously not. Christ showed that there was nothing he could not do had he chosen. His power was almighty. What is also clear is that he chose not to use his power except in very precise ways that supported and illumined his very precise mission. He absolutely refused, for instance, to accept being a king, a temporal king, that is. In our Gospel that I read earlier, St. Matthew narrates how Christ's enemies took counsel on how to put him to death, despite the holiness of his life and the extraordinary deeds of mercy that emanated from him. Christ could have resisted and overcome them by an exercise of divine power, but instead he withdrew from there, though the people followed him to benefit from his power. Christ, for all his power, constantly exercised restraint, humility, and meekness. He did not react to the evil shown against him by exercising his overwhelming power. Rather, he was prepared to suffer. The power he showed in the face of evil was his power to suffer and bear on his own shoulders the suffering flowing from the sin of the world. St. Matthew quotes the prophet Isaiah, predicting that the Messiah would not impose himself over others as do the powerful ones of this world. The prophet wrote, "This was to fulfill what had been spoken through Isaiah the prophet. Behold, my servant whom I have chosen, my beloved in whom I delight. I shall place my spirit upon him, and he will proclaim justice to the Gentiles. He will not contend or cry out, nor will anyone hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, a smouldering wick he will not quench, until he brings justice to victory. And in his name the Gentiles will hope." Matthew chapter 12, verse 14 to 21. The ultimate result of Christ's choice was his death on the cross, and that death was the greatest display of his power to save. He had the power to bear in himself the sins of all mankind, and in this way to take away the sin of the world. He was the great suffering servant predicted by the prophet, and his power, so manifest in his miracles, was finally displayed in the triumph of his death and resurrection. In this way, he showed how God exercises his power. The divine power is exercised to manifest his mercy. We too, who are in Christ, are called to manifest mercy in any exercise of power or human capacity. Let us contemplate the redeeming mercy and compassion of Christ that led him to suffer and to die for the world, rather than to exercise his power in the manner of the world. Let us, in our turn, resolve to follow in his footsteps by showing mercy and compassion in our everyday life, and in bearing with Christ the cross that will undoubtedly come our way in the doing of God's will.